Trump leaned forward across the table, voice already rising, the familiar cadence of attack locked in. You talk about legacy, Barack. You talk about dignity and class. But look at what Michelle left behind. Look at what she actually did. All those speeches about healthy kids and school lunches, and when they go low, we go high. It was theater. Pure theater. And the results? Childhood obesity didn't drop the way she claimed. The numbers never matched the press releases. She spent years lecturing American parents while the actual metrics stayed flat or got worse in key places. That's not leadership. That's branding. Obama sat still, hands folded, eyes steady on Trump. He did not interrupt. He let the words land. Trump kept going. And the White House garden. That little plot they made such a big deal about. Symbolic, sure. But symbolism doesn't feed a nation. Meanwhile, the real work on nutrition standards got watered down the second the political heat got high. Food industry pressure, school districts complaining about cost, kids throwing the food away. Michelle's people knew it. They papered over it with photo ops and book tours. That's the pattern. High rhetoric, soft delivery. He jabbed a finger toward Obama. You sat there and let it happen. You let the First Lady's initiative become the face of your administration's social agenda while the hard numbers never delivered. And now people still act like it was some moral triumph. It wasn't. It was a carefully managed image that didn't survive contact with reality. Obama waited until the last sentence finished. Then he spoke, voice even, volume lower than Trump's but carrying cleanly across the stage. You're right about one thing, Donald. Image matters. It always has. But you're wrong about what Michelle actually did and what the data showed. Let's start with the facts you just skipped. The Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act raised nutrition standards in school meals for the first time in decades. Sodium targets, whole grain requirements, more fruits and vegetables, limits on empty calories. Those standards did not vanish. They were implemented. Participation rates held. And independent evaluations, not White House talking points, found measurable improvements in the nutritional quality of meals served to tens of millions of children. He paused. Not for drama, just to let the numbers sit. Childhood obesity rates among younger children did stabilize, and in some age groups began to decline during the years the standards were in force. That is not flat or worse. CDC data from that period showed the first sustained pause in the long upward climb for preschool-aged kids. The trajectory changed. It did not reverse overnight. No one claimed it would. Public health does not work on campaign timelines. You know that. Trump started to answer. Obama continued without raising his voice. You called the garden theater. It was a garden. It was also a platform that put the conversation about food access and diet quality in front of millions of people who had never thought about school lunch policy before. Symbolism is not the opposite of substance. Sometimes it is the delivery system for substance. The garden did not feed the country. The policy changes that rode alongside it changed what was on the trays. You can dislike the messenger. You cannot erase the policy. Trump's expression tightened. Policy that got rolled back the minute someone else took office. That's how strong it was. Some provisions were later adjusted. That is how legislation works under successive administrations. The core standards on fruits, vegetables, and whole grains largely remained. And the conversation she forced into the open did not disappear. School districts that invested in better menus kept many of those practices because parents noticed and kids adapted. The cultural shift outlasted any single set of rules. Obama leaned in slightly, still calm. You keep framing this as Michelle's personal project that failed to deliver magic. It was never sold as magic. It was sold as incremental progress against a decades-long public health problem driven by marketing, poverty, food deserts, and sedentary lifestyles. You cannot fix that with one garden and a set of guidelines. You can, however, stop pretending the guidelines did nothing. The data does not support your version. Trump cut in. The data is selective. You always pick the slice that flatters the story. Look at the overall adult obesity numbers. They kept climbing. Look at the food industry's influence. It never went away. Look at the pushback from schools that said the new meals cost more, and kids wouldn't eat them. Those were real problems, not right-wing talking points. They were real problems, Obama said, and they were addressed in real time. Cost concerns led to technical assistance and flexibility for districts. Plate waste studies led to adjustments in portion sizes and menu design. The administration did not pretend the rollout was perfect. It adapted. That is different from abandoning the goal. You are treating every friction point as proof of failure. That is not how policy evaluation works. He kept his tone level. Michelle's public role was never about claiming sole credit for solving childhood obesity. It was about using the visibility of the First Lady's office to keep the issue on the national agenda when it would otherwise have been buried under other priorities. You understand visibility. You have used it more aggressively than almost anyone in modern politics. The difference is that she used it to push measurable standards into law and into school cafeterias. You are attacking the messenger while ignoring the mechanism. Trump's voice rose again. I'm attacking the results. The results were mediocre at best, and the marketing was over the top. Let's Move became a brand. Books, appearances, moral lectures. Meanwhile, the structural problems, poverty, single-parent households, screen time, ultra-processed food availability, stayed right where they were. She never touched the hard cultural stuff. She never said the uncomfortable things about family structure or personal responsibility that actually drive these outcomes. Obama did not flinch. She talked about personal responsibility constantly. She talked about parents making better choices, about kids moving more, about communities supporting healthier options. She also refused to pretend that individual choice exists in a vacuum. When the cheapest calories are the least nutritious ones, when safe places to play are scarce, when advertising targets children with precision, individual choice is constrained. Pointing that out is not moral lecturing. It is describing the environment people actually live in. He paused. You prefer a story in which the only variable that matters is personal willpower. That story is incomplete. Willpower matters. Environment matters. Policy that shapes the environment matters. Michelle's work operated on the policy and environment side while still affirming the personal side. You are collapsing all of it into a cartoon of elite scolding so you can dismiss it. That is easier than engaging the actual record. Trump sat back, then came forward again. Record includes the fact that a lot of the progressive left treated her as beyond criticism. Any disagreement was framed as racism or sexism. That shut down honest debate. And when the numbers didn't deliver the transformative change that was implied, the response was always give it more time or the opposition undermined it. Classic. Criticism was never shut down, Obama said. Conservative outlets and lawmakers attacked the standards from day one. School nutrition directors raised practical concerns. Those voices were loud. They were heard. Some of their points led to revisions. The idea that Michelle or the administration operated in a criticism-free zone is another piece of the narrative that does not match reality. What did happen is that the attacks often mixed legitimate policy disagreement with personal mockery of her appearance, her tone, her background. That is a different category. You know the difference. The exchange continued without the temperature dropping. Trump returned to the claim that the entire effort was performative. Obama answered each point with specific policy details, evaluation findings, and the distinction between short-term political scores and longer-term public health trajectories. He refused the framing that reduced Michelle's work to a failed branding exercise. He treated the attack as an opportunity to restate the actual sequence of legislative action, implementation challenges, measured outcomes, and the limits of what any First Lady's initiative can accomplish inside a polarized system. Trump pressed on family structure and cultural factors. Obama acknowledged those factors while refusing to let them erase the policy record. Trump accused selective use of data. Obama cited the specific CDC and USDA evaluations that track changes in meal composition and early childhood obesity trends. The pattern held. Trump expanded the indictment to character and political theater. Obama narrowed each charge back to verifiable actions and results, never matching the volume, never matching the personal edge. By the end of the opening segment, the studio had gone quiet in the way rooms go quiet, when one participant keeps raising the emotional temperature and the other keeps lowering the factual one. Trump had thrown the full weight of his critique at Michelle's public work. Obama had answered without raising his voice, without personal counterattacks, and without conceding the core claim that the effort produced nothing of substance. The contrast was already visible. The next phase would test whether that contrast could be sustained under continued pressure. Trump shifted ground. The opening assault on the school lunch standards in the garden had not produced the collapse he wanted, so he widened the target. Let's talk about the larger legacy, he said. Michelle Obama became a global brand. Speeches, Netflix deals, books, the whole apparatus. And the message was always the same. America is fundamentally broken on race, on gender, on opportunity, and only the enlightened few, led by people like her, can fix it. That message did damage. It taught a generation that grievance is identity and that institutions are presumptively hostile. You sat in the Oval Office while that worldview hardened. You didn't check it. You amplified it. Obama's reply stayed measured. Michelle's public statements on race and opportunity were rooted in her own experience and in the data on persistent gaps. She did not invent the gaps. She described them. Describing a problem is not the same as declaring the country irredeemable. She repeatedly said the opposite, that the country was capable of progress, and that individual effort inside improved systems produced results. You are collapsing a complicated set of speeches into a single cartoon of permanent grievance. That is not accurate. Trump pushed harder. The practical effect was grievance. Schools adopted curricula that centered identity over content. Corporations adopted training that treated ordinary Americans as suspects. The cultural temperature rose. And when people pushed back, they were told they were on the wrong side of history. That is the environment her voice helped create. You cannot separate the First Lady's platform from the broader progressive project that followed. You can separate them, Obama said, and you should. Michelle's work on education and health never required the later excesses you are describing. Those excesses came from other actors, other incentives, other institutional capture. Blaming her for every later development is a way of avoiding the harder question of how institutions actually drift. It is also a way of personalizing a structural problem so that one woman's visibility becomes the explanation for everything you dislike about the culture. He continued without acceleration. On the substance of opportunity, the administration she was part of expanded access to higher education, enforced civil rights protections, and invested in early childhood programs. Those were concrete policy choices. You can argue they were insufficient or poorly designed. You cannot pretend they were pure rhetoric. The same is true of the health initiatives we already discussed. The pattern of attacking the person when the policy record is inconvenient is not new. It is simply efficient. Trump returned to the charge of moral superiority. The tone was the problem. The constant implication that anyone who disagreed was either ignorant or bigoted. That tone poisoned the well. Ordinary people who cared about their kids' nutrition or their school's curriculum felt talked down to. That is why the backlash came. It was not manufactured. It was earned. Obama answered directly, tone is real. Some progressive voices did adopt a tone of moral superiority that alienated people who should have been allies. Michelle's own public style was more precise than that caricature. She criticized systems and outcomes more than she condemned individuals. When she spoke about her own upbringing, she emphasized hard work, parental expectation, and education as the path out. That is not the language of permanent victimhood. You are reading the most polarizing interpreters of her work back onto the work itself. That is a common political move. It is still a distortion. The discussion moved into the post-White House years. Trump listed the commercial success, the media presence, the speaking fees, and framed them as evidence that the entire enterprise had been self-serving. Obama treated the commercial success as irrelevant to the earlier policy record. He noted that former First Ladies of both parties had written books, given speeches, and built post-White House platforms. The difference, he argued, was that Trump was treating ordinary post-presidency activity as proof of earlier insincerity only when the First Lady in question was Michelle. Trump then tied the critique to larger claims about the Obama years, economic recovery that left too many people behind, foreign policy decisions that he called weak, and cultural changes he viewed as destructive. Obama refused to let the conversation become a general referendum on the entire administration. He kept returning the focus to the specific claims about Michelle's initiatives and the evidence surrounding them. Each time Trump expanded the indictment, Obama narrowed it again, citing the legislative text of the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act, the implementation timelines, the independent evaluations, and the distinction between what a First Lady can influence and what requires sustained legislative and cultural work over decades. The exchange grew longer and more detailed. Trump introduced anecdotes from parents and school officials who disliked the new meal standards. Obama acknowledged those experiences and placed them alongside the aggregate data showing improved nutritional profiles. Trump cited later political reversals as proof the original effort lacked durability. Obama treated the reversals as ordinary democratic contestation rather than proof of original failure. The pattern remained consistent. One participant escalated the moral and cultural stakes, the other insisted on the narrower, documented record. By the middle of the second segment, the contrast in method was fully established. Trump's attack relied on cumulative implication, linking the garden to the brand to the cultural climate to the later progressive excesses so that Michelle's public role became a symbol of everything he opposed. Obama's defense relied on disaggregation, separating policy from personality, short-term friction from longer-term trajectory, and one First Lady's initiatives from the broader political movements that followed. Neither man yielded. The audience watched two different theories of how public influence works collide in real time. Trump made a final broader charge. The real damage was the example. Young people watched a First Lady who seemed more interested in lecturing the country than in celebrating it. That example stuck. It fed the idea that patriotism is suspect and that the American story is mainly a story of oppression. You can dress it up in soft language about hope and progress, but the underlying message was corrosive. And you, as president, never corrected it. You let it run. Obama's final stretch of replies stayed inside the same register he had used from the beginning. Michelle's public example included military families, education, health, and the daily work of raising two daughters in the public eye under extreme scrutiny. She spoke about the country's failures because the failures were real, and because ignoring them does not make them disappear. She also spoke about the country's capacity to improve because that capacity is also real. Reducing the entire record to lecturing is a political convenience. It lets you avoid the specific claims she made and the specific policies she supported. He listed them again, without flourish: the nutrition standards, the emphasis on physical activity, the focus on early childhood, the consistent public affirmation of education and work. He noted that none of those required rejecting the country's achievements. He noted that treating every acknowledgement of unfinished work as anti-American is itself a form of political absolutism. Trump tried one last time to personalize the critique, arguing that the calm demeanor itself was a performance designed to make disagreement look unhinged. Obama declined the invitation to perform emotion. He answered the substance, repeated the distinction between policy results and cultural interpretation, and left the larger philosophical disagreement on the table without pretending it had been resolved. The segment closed with both men having stated their positions at length. Trump had presented Michelle's public work as a mixture of failed metrics, excessive branding, and cultural corrosion. Obama had answered with the legislative and evaluative record, the limits of any First Lady's reach, and the refusal to accept a narrative that turned incremental public health and education efforts into a symbol of national decline. The calm did not produce agreement. It produced clarity about the difference in method. One approach sought to collapse a complex set of initiatives into a single story of elite failure. The other insisted on keeping the initiatives, the data, and the political context separate enough that each could be judged on its own terms.